Welcome back to Forward Progress, part of the Hammer Betting Network. I'm your host, Jason Cooper, alongside Tyler Schoon, co-host of the Guilty as Charged podcast. You can follow Tyler on X at Tyler J. Schoon. Today we'll be covering everything you need to know about the Los Angeles Chargers in 2024. But before we get started, quickly, I want you to get a comment down below on how many wins you think the Chargers will get in 2024. Let's jump right into it. Tyler, before we start looking forward, we must look back. The Chargers finished with a 5-12 record last year in the AFC West, and it feels like another wasted season of Justin Herbert. So before we get into 2024, give me one word or phrase to describe the 2023 Chargers season.
I'm going to use the word ego, and I'll tell you about that for two different reasons. So the first is the ego of the head coach, Brandon Staley, by all accounts. And this is something that we had heard, or that I had heard for years leading up to this. There's a certain, I do things my way, and I'm not going to take, any feedback into account and learn and grow. It's my scheme. I'm smart. I'm going to do things my way. And he never changed. And that's something that started to leak out more and more, especially after he got fired mid-season, that he just was unable and unwilling to change. And that was really frustrating for a lot of fans. So the ego is what kept this team from, like you said, doing anything, and unfortunately wasting another Justin Herbert season. The second part of ego is the ego of the owners. And I mean this time in a good way. A lot of owners, it depends on which team you root for. If you're a Cowboys fan, then you kind of know. A lot of owners will not change. They want to run things a certain way. They want the control. They want that power. And for the Chargers, it's kind of been that for Dean Spanos and the Spanos family. Like, there's a certain aspect of control that they have. But they really had to look at themselves and their own egos and say, hey, we are not like even the fourth most popular sports team in Los Angeles. We're not the best team in our own division. We're not the best LA team, the LA football team. So what do we have to do to become a better team, a more popular team, a better team, you name it? And so they really had to look at themselves and go, okay, what do we have to do? And so they fired Brandon Staley mid-season, which they never do. That's something that they do not do. As bad as it's been, I'm a Chargers fan. I've seen a lot of bad football. They always waited till the end of the year. They did this in the middle of the season because they knew they had to go get one guy and put their egos aside and go get someone who, of course, ended up being Jim Harbaugh, that would hopefully lead this team. And he could take all the control and change the team and do whatever they wanted. They really had to put their ego aside to get the Chargers to hopefully be a better team.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned Brandon Staley here, of course, because he's like a big reason why what was holding this team back. They obviously go out, bring in Jim Harbaugh. Just quickly before we get into Jim Harbaugh, who I want to talk about quite a bit, I just remember Jeff Feinberg, friend of the show, always comes on here on Forward Progress, talking about how mad he was that Staley was fired midseason because he wanted to see him almost drag through the streets and just make a mockery of himself, right? And like he was, although he was really happy he got fired, he's like, damn, I wish he got fired at the end of the season because he would have been nice to see him lose a couple more games now when the season was eventually over. Anyways, let's talk about Jim Harbaugh because obviously seismic shift here for the head coach and the coaching staff. The Chargers land a big fish. So I guess tell me a little bit about, we're early on in the offseason here. Tell me a little bit about what Jim Harbaugh has been able to do so far for the Chargers, how he's kind of instilling a different culture surrounding the Chargers. What have you liked so far in this first offseason phase?
He's as advertised, and he was my number one coaching candidate for the Chargers. I think for most Chargers fans, that was the case. And right now we're getting everything that we wanted. He is as advertised as half psycho and half goof. Like, that is Jim Harbaugh to a T. But the psycho part is the good part in a sense. Like, he is a football junkie. And early on, I think the day after they announced his hiring, he's in the weight room. He goes to Home Depot, gets a shop vac, and like is cleaning out the weight room in his khakis, like with his crew, trying to get the weight room to be like pristine. And that's just kind of the football psycho that he is. Like, you have to tuck in your jersey, you have to do things a certain way. But at the same time, he's a total goof. You've seen any clips from him at Michigan or with the 49ers. He doesn't take himself super seriously, even though he is a very serious individual. And I think that's just so endearing to a lot of Chargers fans, of course, and also to the players. Like, the way they've been talking about him, they understand that he is all about his business and all about winning, and everything that you're doing is about winning. But he's not just like a robot. He's not just stoic, and he's not going to not relate. It's that relatability that makes him and has made him such a good coach and such a good teacher, because veterans who are, they're 33 or rookies who are 22 or whatever, they're all buying in because of that relatability. So they believe in what he's doing, and he walks the walk, he talks and walks all that, and they believe in his history, they believe in what he does, but they also just relate to him on a certain level that I don't think was there with the previous coach. Now, it is the honeymoon stage. I get it. Like, we're in the very beginnings of all this, so all's rosy and everything is so good and everyone's in their best shape of their lives and whatever. But it really just seems like the team has bought in, the fans have bought in, and so far everything is the standard that we had hoped for, if not more.
Before we get into the next part of the episode, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors over at Pinnacle. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sports book, offering competitive odds for 25 years. If you're looking to bet on the NFL, NBA, NCAA football, or any sport for that matter, you should have Pinnacle as one of your available outs. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle. Must be 19 plus, and please play responsibly. Yeah, and it seems positive here. Jim Harbaugh obviously comes in and brings in his kind of regime, his coaches, clean house completely on the coordinator side of things. Brings along Jesse Minter. I want to talk a little bit about the defense here as the first kind of point. Well, now that we're getting to the nitty gritty, last year obviously Chargers had a defensive minded head coach, but I mean their defense has just been atrocious under Brandon Staley. Last year they were 24th in total EPA, 24th in dropback EPA, 26th in defensive DVOA as well. Harbaugh steps in, brings in Jesse Minter, and I mean, what? Tell me a little bit about Jesse Minter's kind of style of play here, because I'm curious to see how this new system is going to be implemented. On top of that, they also bring in a couple defensive pieces on like shorter term deals. You got like Puna Ford, Denzel Perryman, Christian Fulton, and then also they drafted Junior Coulson. So tell me a little bit about the style of player, the style of system that they're going to try and run on defense here. And then also how do these players that they brought in, how those pieces might fit in?
Yeah, so in theory, they'll run a base 3-4, but we know that's like just a thing that people say, like that's the name of the defense, but they change it as needed. They're going to have nickel defense quite a bit out there. They're going to have the two corners, two safeties, and someone in the slot. Could be Derwin James, the safety, could be Jaw Taylor, the slot corner, whatever. But the general, they'll be in some sort of nickel defense. When watching Jesse Minter's defense, at least at Michigan, and we watched a lot. Like, I'm big into the draft, so I watched 2 million different Michigan defensive players. And it's so evident that the Michigan defense is built on being like cerebral more than anything else. And I think, and fundamentally sound. And I think they have to be. If you look at, the recruiting classes of like Alabama and Georgia and some of these other recruiting classes, they're just more talented. So like Georgia will just line up 5-star recruits and kill you. And it doesn't, now Georgia's very well coached too, don't get me wrong. But I felt like watching Michigan, the connectivity between all the different pieces was so unlike something that I had seen watching any other defense, and certainly very different than what I saw with the Chargers the previous season. So I think that they're going to be very fundamentally sound. Jesse Minter and I believe Devlin, the defensive line coach, mentioned that Minter sees everything through the lens of a defensive back. So it's going to be a very like defensive back approach. They're going to see the defense is going to be through there, which it sort of was for the previous regime too. But still, that's kind of more Minter style. As far as the new pieces they brought in, like Puna Ford's going to be playing more inside as that nose tackle type, which is going to fit him a bit better than he did at a previous spot where he's more of like a B gap guy. But the big addition is Junior Coulson, truly, because you how often do you get a player who like actually knows the defense? Like, there's knowing the scheme, and there's like literally I was just in this defense and I was the guy in this defense, and he was Navarro Bowman's linebacker 1 in this class, who's the Chargers' current linebacker coach and former 49ers linebacker. And they believe in this kid. They say that he's in meetings and they'll tell him to stop answering questions because he's getting them all right. He's like, please, Junior, please stop answering questions. And they'll try to float out questions about the defense to like the defensive backs. And even the defensive backs get it wrong. And then Junior Coulson's like, okay, I'll get it right. I'll tell you how smart I am. And like, I'll show you what I know. Like, we are so excited about him. My reaction to his draft pick was just like screaming and shouting and just being super excited for it, because he's a great player, at least a great prospect. He's a there every day Harbaugh kind of guy. It's a perfect fit. So my one concern for this defense is, I just wrote an article about this, is that there's a big difference between, at least I assume there's going to be a big difference in the play of the edge group versus the DB room, and in particular the corner room. So the edge rushers for the Chargers, who also just added Bud Dupree, kept Joey, kept Khalil, and had Tuli Tuipulotu. The edge group is going to be great, but the secondary is not going to be great. And looking historically at teams that had this big difference in terms of like PFF grade between their edge play and their secondary play, those big gaps did not yield great defenses, especially if you had a weak defensive tackle room, which the Chargers also currently had. There's no Aaron Donald. There's no Jeffrey Simmons. There's no great superstar defensive tackle in that room. Unfortunately, the best that any team got in EPA per play on defense, with that stark contrast between the edge group and the secondary, is like 21st in EPA per play. And that was the Cowboys defense that got their defensive coordinator fired. So it's not really a great outlook for the Chargers. So I believe that they're going to, like, edge rusher is going to be great. I think they have some good pieces. But I think Chargers fans are hoping, like, oh, this is going to be an elite defense immediately, just because it's not Brandon Staley. And look, I hope that's the case. Of course I do. I make more money when the Chargers are good. But I don't know that they're going to be great immediately, because their secondary is just, it's full of, at minimum, unproven players and maybe not even so great players.
Yeah, and like you said, hopefully addition by subtraction, and of course losing Brandon Staley. But the edge pieces are there and the line pieces are there. That's what I noticed when I was looking and researching for this video. But again, like you said, that secondary leaves a lot to be desired. Looking at the offense, the Chargers bring in Greg Roman. He steps in as the new offensive coordinator for the team. And one thing that has stuck out to me throughout his interviews is that he mentions wanting to make more of an emphasis on running the football in the running game and kind of open up the passing game through the running game for Justin Herbert. Obviously, he brought in his crew, for his running back crew from Baltimore, and J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Just curious your thoughts on that sort of philosophy for this offense coming into the year, and what are your thoughts on Greg Roman so far throughout the offseason?
Yeah, if they didn't go Jim Harbaugh, obviously I wanted like a Ben Johnson type, because that's kind of seems to be the future and even the current of how offenses are going in the NFL. But with Greg Roman, what was undeniable is that the floor of this team would be elevated through the run game and through offensive line play, and then even through tight end play. That's just what he's had. It's undeniable wherever he's gone. They've had pretty solid offensive line play. That's definitely great when paired with Jim Harbaugh and his philosophies. And they've had a good run game, and they're going to try to push the ball down the field in a play action sort of game. And so I think that just elevates the floor of this team. And I think it just elevates the floor of Justin Herbert early on, who is no longer like as anticipatory as we would have liked him to be and to develop at this point. But when you have on your fourth different system, like, you can't anticipate as well, as because you're on your fourth system, you're trying to learn things over and over again. And it's just unfair to him. So I think just keeping things rooted in a nice run game, strong offensive line, and a great play action game that suits his arm talent, I think is going to be fantastic and really elevates the floor. But I'm mentioning floor and not ceiling. That's the part that was a bit of a hang up for me here. Now, Justin Herbert gives you that ceiling sometimes. Sometimes it's just like, hey, Herbert, do your thing. And he does the thing, and the Chargers will score 38, and then they'll still lose because they had a bad defense. But at least he can go out there and put up points. I am curious if Greg Roman can then build upon the bones and the structure of his offense and allow this team to win games where it might be a shootout. Because I just talked about the secondary and how it's not like a great secondary. So push comes to shove and you're playing the Bengals and Jamar Chase, or you're playing the Chiefs. Like, can you keep up? Can you score enough? You know, of course, everyone's like, yeah, if you just run the football and play good defense, all will be good. But it doesn't always play like that. So can you get out there and score in a hurry through the passing game? So that's definitely my one hang up. You know, the Ravens obviously moved on from Greg Roman, and I can't remember the name of the coordinator they brought in, but they were a better offense this year, really early on, it seems like, at least in the passing game for sure. And so I am curious if Greg Roman, having this time off and with Herbert as his quarterback, can he take that next step forward as a coordinator? And then just do the Chargers have the pieces to do that? Because I believe in the potential of a lot of these these receivers that the Chargers have, but it doesn't mean that there's a Justin Jefferson in there or a Jamar Chase in there. You know, they don't even have like a real reliable receiving tight end in there. So that's kind of my hang up, but it is year one. I think the goal right now is to establish a scheme, get Herbert comfortable in something he'll be in for many years, and just elevate the floor. And hopefully Herbert can take care of the rest.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about offensive line play there, and how Greg Roman's kind of been able to elevate or just kind of produce offensive linemen and have good offensive line play when he's the offensive coordinator. And of course, everyone knows how Jim Harbaugh is. That's kind of his identity. When he first came into with the Niners, he like drafted all those, completely reshaped their offensive line. How do you feel right now about the offensive line heading into 2024? They brought in Bradley Bozeman. They drafted Joe Alt to play right tackle, but the guards still feel a little weak. So is there any concern with the offensive line? Are you happy with the additions they made? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so am I happy with the additions? Yes, I am. When Bradley Bozeman was cut, it's like, okay, there's the veteran presence that the Chargers desperately need given their current roster. Awesome. Joe Alt, I think he was a top 6 player in the draft, not counting quarterbacks. And so them taking him top 5, while I would have gone receiver, I get it. Joe Alt, good prospect. So like you said, the guard spot is definitely more of a concern. And I'll talk about center too in a bit. Zion Johnson, their left guard, I don't have as much concerns about. I think for him, it'll just help that he's in a good system where he can just, like, he's almost there and he has excellent film until like the one time that he doesn't per game. And I think that will be hopefully fixed with this new regime. The interesting part is right guard, because their right tackle last year, Trey Pipkins, has now been announced, I guess, as the starter at right guard. So he's kicking inside to right guard, which he's never played. Not in the NFL, not a rep in training camp, I don't think, and not at Sioux Falls, the college that he came from all the way back in 2019. So that's definitely more of a concern there. I don't know how that fit's going to be. So that is the primary concern. And then Bradley Bozeman, the center, I was happy with the addition because they needed a veteran presence. That doesn't mean that I didn't want them to then upgrade and find a starter of the future there. And they didn't. This was a great interior offensive line class, a great center draft class. You know, Brandon Thorne, big offensive line guru, said this is a great class. Chargers didn't add anybody at center after Bozeman or before Bozeman. And so I'm just worried. One, we're hanging a lot of expectations. We're hanging a lot of the season on Bradley Bozeman being good and then being healthy. Because last year with Carolina, he was not good. He was not a good center statistically. The numbers, at least in terms of pass protection, are not there. It is a run-first offense, so that'll help the Chargers this year. But he wasn't good last year in Carolina. That said, no one was really good on offense in Carolina last year. But the concern is, okay, what if he gets hurt? Because after that, the backup center they have has like 2 starts, and they were fine. But that's not a great center backup prospect. Now, they seem to believe in him. Great. I'm not going to tell Jim Harbaugh that he's wrong, but it is concerning because I've seen this team with a Corey Linsley, and then I've seen the team completely plummet without him. And I don't expect Bozeman to play like Corey Linsley, who just retired, but I need something that resembles at least average center play. So hopefully he can at least get back to that, and then hopefully he can stay healthy. So I believe in the tackles. I believe in Zion Johnson. After that, things are a bit shaky.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to appeal to authority on this one and just kind of hope that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman know what they're doing. It seems like they do. So a little bit more optimistic I am, at least on that offensive line. Before we get into expectations and win totals, things like that, last thing I want to touch on here for this offense is the receiver room. You hinted at it a little bit, but obviously this past offseason, the Chargers trade away Keenan Allen. They cut Mike Williams, and of course, those were kind of like your pieces for the last couple of years. Although they were hurt throughout a lot of that stretch, they were your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 over the last couple of years for Justin Herbert. And the problem here is that there's simply was not a lot of internal replacements. You have currently on the team former first-round pick Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer. They go out in the offseason, they sign DJ Shark, they draft Ladd McConkey, and they draft Brandon Rice. I'm just curious to hear what you think the wide receiver room will look like come game 1. What will who do you expect to be the 3 wide receiver sets? Are we going to kind of see a wide receiver by committee approach where we see kind of a revolving door on who's playing on each snap?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the big question mark comes down to, is DJ Chark going to be able to return to his quote unquote former self? Because everyone, as soon as they signed DJ Chark, went, hey, let's look at his RAS and look at his 40 time. That's awesome. He's had multiple injuries since then. That 40 time, I can't imagine is exactly the same. But I do expect him, if he's at least some semblance of his former self, that he's a starter. So to me, it's Josh Palmer, Ladd McConkey, who's been playing a ton of slot in camp, and then DJ Chark, which obviously rules out Quentin Johnston. And I just think that he is not what anyone hoped he would be at this point. And even if he is a yak guy, which he was coming out of college, they're going to make Ladd McConkey do that, who both Joe Ortiz, the GM, and Jim Harbaugh called Ladd McConkey like just Bowers light, someone who runs after the catch like a Brock Bowers. Different prospects, I get it. One's a generational tight end, but still, like, they believe in what he can do after the catch. So Palmer will be more so your X. Chark, I think he may be more your Z, and then McConkey could be your slot kind of guy. That's going to be your primary 3, I think. We'll see with Josh Palmer. I'm curious where he stands in the hierarchy by year's end. He's their best receiver right now. Like, by far, he's their best receiver. At minimum, he's the most proven guy. Like, he went to Kansas City last year, dropped like a $133 on Trent McDuffie in that great Chiefs secondary. No one else has shown that they can do that. But how quickly does a new regime want to plug in their guys? whether it's Brendan Rice or even 7th-round pick Cornelius Johnson they took after Brendan Rice, a former Michigan wide receiver. Do they want to start plugging those guys in? Because they came out and said that they had like a round 3 grade on those guys, and they got them in round 7. So how much do they play? I don't know. But right now, I do expect it to be Palmer as the primary beneficiary, the number 1 guy. McConkey probably works his way into that as well, but he is a 2nd-round pick. And then DJ Chark is the 3rd guy.
Yeah, and obviously with Palmer, he still has that rapport with
exactly.
Yeah, he's the right. So it's like it seems like he'll probably be leading the wide receivers through the gate. But again, I kind of sneakily like this the wide receiver class that they drafted in this draft. So anyways, let's flip over to win totals and expectations, brought to you by Pinnacle. Just taking a look at the win total right now for the Los Angeles Chargers. 8.5 right now, juice towards the over. Right now to win their division, plus 365. AFC champion 15-1, and Super Bowl is 32-1. Quite a lot of turnover on both sides of the ball, both in play calling and in actual players themselves. You bring in completely new systems, and on top of that, they play in an incredibly tough conference, the Chargers here. It seems like there's probably going to be like 11 teams that are expecting to make the playoffs, even though there's only 7 playoff spots. So what are your expectations for the Chargers in 2024?
I expect them to at least try to make this playoff push. Now, I'll start off by saying this, actually. They're not winning the division. That is the Chiefs' division until it isn't their division. Like, I'm not going to predict that. I've done that when they traded away Tyreek Hill. Like, here comes the Chargers, and then they just win multiple Super Bowls. So I'm not doing this whole, like, oh, Chiefs are going down this year kind of thing. So I expect the Chargers to try to compete for, like, that last wild card spot. And it really comes down to the schedule that they're playing is really easy. Like, they were not very good last year, at least in terms of their record. Therefore, you get to play the worst teams across, both conferences. And so when you get to play the Falcons and you get to play the Panthers and you get to play Arizona and you get to play Tennessee and New England, these teams that are not exactly the juggernauts of the NFL right now, you are going to stack more wins. And for the most part, the Chargers are going to have a quarterback advantage in almost every game they play. And that makes a difference when, even if the talent on both sides is pretty similar, Herbert's better than Bryce Young, and he's better than a lot of these quarterbacks out there. And Jim Harbaugh as a coach, even though this is his first year with the Chargers, he has a coaching advantage over most guys too. So I expect the Chargers to go about 10 wins this year, but I don't think they're as strong of a 10-win team as that would indicate. Like, wow, 10 wins, that's great. You doubled your win total. I think it's mostly because of the schedule they're facing. You have this exact same team playing last year's schedule, 7 wins maybe for the Chargers, but it's an easy schedule for them. So I expect them to have the over on that 8.5. I'd say about 9 or 10. I almost said 9, given the revelations on defense and how rough that's going to look if the secondary isn't up to snuff, but I'll give them 10 wins. And that feels optimistic, but pessimistic to the other half of the fan base who thinks they're winning 14 games this year. They're not going to do that. But I expect them to at least compete for that final wild card spot. But like you said, the question is whether that's enough to even get in. If it just is 10 games enough, I don't know. Does Aaron Rodgers come back to the Jets? I'm kidding, he will. But wherever he is, if he comes back, like the division's going to be, or not division, the conference is going to be very difficult. So I think they got to get to 10 wins and then hope they get some help to actually get in the dance.
Yeah, they got a little bit of help last year with regards to that schedule, like you mentioned here. So it's really going to be a dogfight for those wild card spots. As I'm doing these previews, I'm like looking through. I'm like, damn, there's a lot of teams that really want to make the playoffs in the AFC. Yes. Only so many spots. Anyways, that does it for us here today. Let us know your thoughts on the 2024 Chargers in the comment section down below. And make sure you check out Tyler on X at Tyler J. Schoon. If you made it this far, guess what? That means you like this content. So press that like button. It goes a long way for us. And if you enjoy this content and you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're previewing all 32 NFL teams here on Forward Progress as we make our way towards training camp. So make sure you turn notifications on when you subscribe so you never miss out on our newest videos. If you're not into notifications, there's going to be a little button on your screen. Bookmark that playlist, and then that way you won't miss out on our newest content. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next one.